My sister threw a lavish party using money she stole from me. When I took her to court, she tried to ruin my business. Now, she's out of my life for good. I'm 34 male, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the people closest to you can sometimes be the ones who do the most damage. I've always been the kind of guy who keeps his head down, works hard, and doesn't make waves. I don't like drama. I've never been one to chase the spotlight or talk big. I'm more about showing up, putting in the work, and going home at the end of the day. But family? Family is where my boundaries blurred, especially when it came to my sister. She's 2 years younger than me, and growing up we were close. At least, I thought we were. We had the usual sibling squabbles, sure, but nothing serious. I remember when we were kids. She'd follow me around everywhere, trailing me like a shadow. I thought she looked up to me. Maybe that's why I let things slide for so long. I wanted to help her. I wanted to believe she'd do better if she just had one more chance, one more helping hand. But I had no idea what it would eventually cost me, financially, emotionally, and personally. A few years ago, I started my own business, a small IT consultancy. Nothing glamorous. But I'd spent years saving up and working dead-end jobs just to make this dream happen. It was a slog, but I poured myself into it. There were late nights, long weekends, and plenty of times I worried I'd go under. But after a couple of years, things finally started to pick up. I landed a few major clients, and for the first time in my life, I was making real money. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable with savings and a steady income. I thought I could finally relax a bit. That's when my sister started coming around. At first, it was just small things. Could I spot her for rent this month? Could I lend her a little money to cover her car payment? She'd been in and out of jobs since her early 20s, always chasing some new venture that never seemed to pan out. She wanted to be an influencer at one point, then a fitness coach, then a small business owner. I was proud of her ambition. But after each failed attempt, she always came back to me with the same sad eyes, saying she just needed a little more help, just a bit to get her back on her feet. I'll admit, I didn't see the pattern at first. I wanted to believe she'd find her footing eventually, so I helped her out. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. It was only money, I told myself, and it's not like I was hurting for it. But each time, she'd promise to pay me back, and then nothing. She'd go radio silent until the next time she needed something. Still, I brushed it off. Family helps family, right? Then about a year ago, she had this idea to start a wellness retreat business. She wanted to rent a cabin in the mountains, hire some spiritual guides, whatever that meant, and bring in high-paying clients for yoga and meditation weekends. She said it would only take a little startup money. I was hesitant, but she swore this time it would be different. I've got the plan all laid out, she'd said, showing me a slapdash business proposal that looked like it was thrown together in half an hour. Against my better judgment, I loaned her $5,000 to help her get started. A month later, she was posting pictures from Hawaii on Instagram, recharging her energy before her big business launch. No cabin, no clients, no business. Just a tropical vacation on my dime. I called her out on it furious, but she laughed it off. I just needed a reset, she said. You can't start a wellness business if you're not in the right headspace. She sounded so confident, as if this was completely reasonable. I let it go. I was angry, but I still wanted to believe in her. I didn't want to be the guy who abandoned his sister when she needed help. So I let it go. Fast forward to last month. I was finally in a good place. The business was running smoothly, I had a solid team, and I was even thinking about expanding. I hadn't heard from my sister in a while, and I'd started to hope maybe she was doing all right on her own. Then I got a call from a friend of mine who'd gone to high school with both of us. He sounded surprised, almost awkward, when he brought it up. Hey man, did you know your sister's throwing a huge party tonight? Like crazy big one. I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't been invited, which wasn't unusual given our rocky history. But he was insistent. No, you don't get it, man. She rented out this big event space. There's a DJ catering everything. Looks like it's going to cost a fortune. My heart sank. There was no way she could afford something like that on her own. I thought about all the times she'd borrowed money from me. All the times she'd disappeared without paying me back. I had a horrible suspicion that this was somehow on my tab. I didn't plan on crashing her party, but curiosity and a sinking feeling of dread got the better of me. I walked into the venue that night, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It looked like a nightclub, complete with a red carpet, velvet ropes, and a massive photo booth with props. There was sushi, a champagne tower, waitstaff carrying trays of appetizers. I saw her, laughing and drinking with her friends, dressed to the nines in an outfit that probably cost more than my last month's mortgage payment. When she saw me, she sauntered over, a bit tipsy, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "Isn't this amazing?" she said, twirling around, clearly loving every second of it. I wanted something memorable for my 30th. Go big or go home, right? I just stared at her, speechless. I managed to ask, "How in the world did you pay for all this?" She laughed and waved her hand dismissively, like I'd asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Oh, relax. It's fine. I borrowed some money." Then, she leaned in, giggling, and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll pay you back eventually." I was frozen. The casualness. The sheer audacity. She had no shame. No guilt. She genuinely thought I'd be fine with her stealing from me to fund her birthday bash. And that's exactly what it was, stealing. When I pressed her for details, she rolled her eyes. "It's not like you're using it. Besides, you're family. What's the big deal?" The big deal was that she'd crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed until that moment. I didn't say another word. I left, drove straight to my office, and logged into my business accounts. Sure enough, there was a recent transfer, $15,000 from my business checking to her personal account. She'd labeled it consulting fees. A pathetic attempt at making it look legitimate. I stared at the screen, rage boiling inside me. She hadn't even tried to cover it up. I'd given her access to my accounts once a long time ago, when I was swamped and needed her help with some basic admin work. I never thought she'd betray that trust. The next day, I called her, hoping for an explanation. Maybe even an apology. But the second she picked up, she went on the defensive. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. It was a birthday party. You can afford it. It's not like you're hurting for money." When I told her I was planning to press charges, she laughed. Actually laughed and called me selfish. "You're going to ruin our family over a misunderstanding? It's not like I took it forever. You're blowing this out of proportion." But it wasn't a misunderstanding. She'd stolen from me. And it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that she'd done it without a second thought, assuming I'd be okay with it. She saw my hard work, my business, as her personal bank. And when I told her I was done, she tried every trick in the book to make me feel guilty. Over the next few weeks, she pulled out all the stops. First, she tried sweet-talking me, promising to pay me back if I just gave her more time. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, telling our parents and mutual friends that I was being unreasonable, that I was throwing away our relationship over a little mistake. My mother called, pleading with me to be the bigger person, saying I couldn't throw my own sister under the bus over something as small as money. "Family is family," she said in that pleading tone that used to make me feel guilty. "You've always been the reliable one. She's always needed a little more help." But it wasn't small. It was my business, my livelihood. It was the trust she'd shattered by treating my work, my sacrifices, like her personal piggy bank. She'd put my company at risk, all for a party she could brag about on Instagram. When I didn't back down, she escalated. I started getting complaints from a few clients. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe a few minor issues that came up on their end. But then the emails got strange. Some of my most loyal clients, the ones who'd been with me from the beginning, started expressing concerns over supposed negative feedback they'd received about my services. They wouldn't go into specifics, but they said they'd heard rumors, whispers that my company was unreliable and unprofessional. I felt like I was going insane. My work had always been solid, and I'd never had issues with these clients. It wasn't until one client, a friend of a friend who trusted me enough to be blunt, told me the truth that I realized what was happening. "She told me you were going through some personal struggles," he said, awkwardly, barely able to look me in the eye, "that your business might be on the rocks. She wanted me to know. In case you couldn't keep up with the workload." It hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd gone behind my back, spreading lies to make my clients question me. My own sister. I don't know how she found them, or what exactly she'd said, but I could imagine the story she'd painted. Her poor, overworked brother who was too stubborn to let her help him. I was furious, but at that moment, I was too exhausted to even process it fully. She was trying to ruin my reputation, turn my clients against me. And for what? So, I dropped the charges and let her off the hook. I went to my parents, hoping they'd finally see the situation for what it was. I explained everything. How she'd stolen from me, manipulated my clients, and was now actively working to destroy my business. My mom looked heartbroken, but the response was the same. "She's your sister," she said quietly, as though that was the ultimate argument. "She's family. Family doesn't take each other to court." I looked at my father, hoping for some backup, but he just shook his head. Maybe it's not right what she did, he admitted, but dragging this through the courts? Think about what this will do to all of us. To her future. To us as a family. To them it was black and white. She was family, and family forgives. But for me, there was no forgiving this. I'd spent years helping her, covering for her, giving her money whenever she needed it. But this was different. This wasn't a mistake or a rough patch. This was premeditated, intentional, and heartless. She didn't just borrow a little money, or make a bad decision. She'd used everything she knew about me to try to destroy me. And she'd done it all with a smile on her face, expecting I'd just roll over like I always had. When I refused to drop the charges, she took things up a notch. I started getting nasty messages from extended family members. People I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly reaching out to tell me what a terrible brother I was. They said I was selfish, vindictive. Choosing money over family. My cousin even sent me a message saying he'd never seen someone ruin their own family like this. It was as if she'd rallied the entire family against me, spinning herself as a victim of my overreaction. She claimed I was destroying her life over a little misunderstanding, painting herself as the poor younger sister who just couldn't catch a break. And in her version of events, I was the greedy older brother who valued money over his own blood. The worst part, some people believed her. She'd always been charismatic. The life of the party. People loved her. And she knew exactly how to twist the story to make herself look like the innocent one. Suddenly, people I know my whole life were sending me passive-aggressive messages, hinting that I should reconsider or think about what's really important. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just ignore what she'd done. So, I went through with pressing charges. She was arrested. And while it wasn't a lengthy process, seeing her in court felt like an out-of-body experience. She walked in looking put together. Like she was the wrong party. Like she was going to plead her case and everyone would see her as the misunderstood younger sister. Her lawyer painted her as a struggling young woman who'd only borrowed the money out of desperation. He emphasized how she hadn't had an easy time in life. How she'd been between jobs and just wanted to celebrate her birthday. He even had the audacity to imply that I, her wealthy brother, had taken advantage of her by lending her money in the first place. I sat there, feeling like I was watching a bad soap opera, unable to believe how warped her version of the truth had become. The judge wasn't buying it though. The evidence was clear. She'd accessed my business account without permission, transferred money to herself and lied about it. The court ruled in my favor and she was ordered to repay me the stolen amount and sentenced to community service. But even with the judgment, she refused to accept responsibility. I could see it in her eyes as we left the courtroom. To her, I was a villain. She didn't see her own actions as wrong, only that she'd been caught. After the trial, my family made one last attempt to guilt me into letting it go. They pleaded with me to give her time to let her pay me back in her own way. My mother even suggested I loan her the money to cover the court-ordered repayments. I was speechless. Even after everything, they expected me to clean up her mess. I stood firm. This is her problem to fix, I said. I'd done enough. The weeks following the court ruling were some of the hardest of my life. Family gatherings became tense, with my parents and extended family treating me like I was the one who betrayed them. My sister played up the victim role, spinning sob stories about how I'd ruined her life over a little mistake, painting herself as a misunderstood woman who just wanted to make her birthday special. She told anyone who would listen that I'd chosen my precious money over my own blood. The worst part? People believed her. Friends started distancing themselves, caught up in her version of events, convinced I'd overreacted. My own family barely spoke to me. And when they did, it was cold and clipped. I felt like an outsider. Like I'd somehow become the villain in my own life. I had no one in my corner. No one who understood that this wasn't about money. It was about trust, betrayal, and finally standing up for myself after years of being taken advantage of. Months went by and the tension in the family didn't ease. Every holiday, every family dinner was like walking into enemy territory. My mother would look at me with disappointment, like I'd somehow broken her heart. My father kept trying to talk sense into me, urging me to make things right with her. She's family, he'd say. At the end of the day, she's still your sister. But she wasn't my sister anymore. Not in the way I'd always thought of her. She was someone who saw my success, my hard work, as something she was entitled to. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a resource. Someone she could drain without consequence. Eventually, I had to make a choice. I stopped going to family gatherings. I stopped answering calls from relatives who only reached out to lecture me. I focused on my business. On my life. On rebuilding the reputation she'd tried so hard to tarnish. It wasn't easy. And there were nights I lay awake, wondering if I'd made the right decision. But then I remember the way she'd smiled at that party. The laughter in her voice when she told me she'd borrowed the money. I remember the messages from clients. The smug look on her face in court. The endless manipulation and lies. And I know, deep down, that I'd done the only thing I could. That sometimes, family doesn't mean loyalty. Sometimes it means walking away to protect yourself. Years later, my sister still hasn't repaid me. She never apologized. Never admitted fault. She's moved on to other ventures. Other people to leech off of. My parents still hope we'll make up one day. But I know better. I've seen the darkness that entitlement and manipulation can bring. Even from someone you once trusted. And I've learned that sometimes, protecting yourself means making the hardest choice of all. Choosing to leave the people who hurt you behind.